A 79-year-old man passed away without leaving a will. When his daughter went to claim the inheritance, she accidentally found an old key. What she uncovered left her speechless. Emily Stewart, a woman in her early 40s, had grown accustomed to a life distant from her father, William. William, now 79, was a quiet, reclusive man who rarely expressed his emotions. Time and distance had created an invisible chasm between them, and as years passed, the connection that once bound them had become faint, like a whisper in the back of Emily's mind. Their relationship had always been strained, marred by misunderstandings and an unspoken tension that neither of them seemed capable of resolving. Emily had left New York in her 20s, venturing off to build her own life, away from the memories of her childhood home. Her relationship with her father was complicated, particularly after the passing of her mother. In the wake of her mother's death, William had withdrawn even further into himself, his world becoming a solitary landscape of routine and quietude. He was a man of few words, and his silences spoke volumes. Emily had struggled with this silence, often misinterpreting it as indifference, even as resentment. As the years slipped by, their communications became increasingly sporadic. Occasional phone calls and the rare holiday card were all that remained of the bond they once shared. In Emily's mind, her father was a man whose love came with walls too high to scale, and she felt her own resentment grow quietly with each passing year. They had drifted so far apart that her father's life became a mystery to reach out to. One rainy morning, Emily received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line was distant, yet composed, conveying the news that her father had passed away suddenly in his sleep. William had died alone in the quiet confines of his home, leaving behind a lifetime of memories, regrets, and, as she would soon find out, secrets. The news felt surreal. Emily hadn't anticipated the weight of the grief that settled in her chest. Although their relationship had been distant, William was still her father. The memories of her childhood and the few precious moments they had shared flooded back, a bittersweet reminder of what had been left unresolved. As she packed her bags and made arrangements to fly back to New York, Emily's mind raced with questions. Her father had left no will, no final instructions, no messages for her to decipher. She didn't know if this was another testament to his reticence or simply a result of his old age and isolation. She couldn't shake the lingering regret that had been with her for years, a gnawing feeling that there was more to their story, something she had missed or misunderstood. The journey back to New York was filled with contemplation and guilt. Had she truly known her father, or had she only ever seen him through the lens of her own hurt and assumptions? She found herself wondering if she had misunderstood him all these years, but the thought felt pointless now. He was gone, and the conversations they never had, the reconciliations she never sought, were all now lost to time. Arriving at the old house felt surreal. The modest two-story home was as she remembered it, nestled in a quiet neighborhood where the hustle and bustle of the city seemed miles away. The house stood there, frozen in time, as if waiting for her return. Emily's footsteps echoed as she stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards underfoot greeting her like an old friend. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, a reminder of a past long untouched. She looked around, taking in the remnants of her father's life scattered across the rooms. Each item told a story. A worn leather chair where he'd read his morning paper, the small framed photographs of her mother that he'd kept close by, and a table adorned with trinkets she barely recognized. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. This house was a museum of memories, each corner holding fragments of a man she had never fully understood. As she moved through the rooms, memories began to flood back. She could almost hear her father's voice, stern yet gentle, as he taught her lessons about life, or see his silhouette in the dim light as he sat quietly, deep in thought. For the first time in years, Emily felt a pang of regret that went beyond their surface-level conflicts. She realized that this house held more than just memories. It was a repository of her father's life, a life she had scarcely known, each item adding a new layer to her understanding of the man she had thought she knew. Her fingers traced over the worn leather of her father's favorite armchair, and the weight of her memories seemed to settle around her like a blanket, both comforting and suffocating. In one of the study drawers, buried beneath stacks of old receipts and letters, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She pulled it out and examined it, a small, tarnished key, its edges worn smooth. She turned it over in her hands, noting the way it gleamed faintly in the dim light, as if it had been waiting for her. Her mind raced as she tried to recall if she had ever seen this key before, but no memory surfaced. Then she remembered the locked room on the second floor, a room her father had always kept tightly closed and out of bounds. As a child, Emily had often asked her father about that room, wondering what lay behind the door. But he had only smiled faintly and told her it was nothing to worry about. Over time, her curiosity had faded, and she had stopped asking, accepting that there were simply parts of her father's life he wished to keep private. But now, with the key in hand, the door felt less like a mystery and more like an invitation, a final piece of her father's story that he had left for her to uncover. With a mixture of anticipation and unease, Emily made her way up the narrow staircase to the second floor. Her footsteps echoed down the empty hallway where the silence pressed in, heavy and thick. At the far end stood the locked door, its once polished wood now dull with age, the brass handle tarnished. She felt a strange mix of excitement and dread as she approached, memories of her childhood fascination with the room flooding back to her. Taking a deep breath, Emily slipped the key into the lock. The key fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. With a soft click, the lock released, and the door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. Inside, the room was frozen in time. Dust motes floated in the air, caught in beams of sunlight, filtering through the faded curtains. The walls were lined with shelves, each one cluttered with objects that seemed to capture pieces of her father's life. She moved slowly, almost reverently, as she took it all in. There were old records, framed photos of people she didn't recognize, and stacks of letters tied together with delicate ribbon. Each item held the weight of years, memories that had long been hidden away. As she moved further into the room, her eyes fell on a small wooden desk near the far wall. On its surface sat a beautifully crafted wooden box, its lid intricately carved with flowers and vines. The wood was smooth and polished, as if her father had carefully preserved it over the years. And etched into the top, in her father's neat, familiar handwriting, was her name, Emily. Her heart pounded as she approached the box, drawn to it by an almost magnetic pull. With trembling hands, she reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, was an old-fashioned pocket watch, its silver chain gleaming faintly in the dim light. Next to it lay a letter, its edges yellowed with age, sealed with a wax stamp. For a moment, Emily simply stared at the letter, her breath catching in her throat. She felt a strange mix of emotions, grief, curiosity, and a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite name. This letter, she knew, was a message from her father, a message he had left for her to find. She couldn't help but wonder if this was his way of reaching out to her, of saying the things he had never been able to say in life. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the page, taking in her father's familiar handwriting. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that seemed to reach out from beyond the grave, wrapping around her heart. "Dear Emily," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I am sorry for the silence between us, for the walls I've built that kept you at a distance. There are things I never told you, things I kept hidden, not out of shame, but out of love. I always wanted to protect you, but perhaps in doing so, I only made you feel further away." She paused, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. This was a side of her father she had never known, a man who spoke with vulnerability and regret. She felt her eyes begin to sting, and she blinked rapidly, forcing herself to continue reading. "I kept this room locked because it held pieces of my past, memories I was afraid to share, memories that I thought might burden you. But now, I realize that they are as much a part of your story as they are mine. There is something you need to know, something I should have told you long ago. You see, Emily, you were not born into our family. Your mother and I adopted you when you were a baby, and from the moment we held you in our arms, we loved you as our own." Emily's breath caught, her heart pounding as the truth unfolded before her. Her fingers tightened around the letter, her mind reeling with the revelation. She had never once suspected that she was adopted, that the man she had known as her father was not her biological parent. All her life, she had felt that she belonged, that she was a part of him, and now this truth, so unexpected and raw, shook her to her core. As she continued reading, her father's words began to blur, her tears mingling with the ink on the page. "Emily, you are my daughter, no matter the circumstances of your birth. I want you to know that you were chosen, that your mother and I wanted you, loved you, and cherished you beyond measure. I know that my ways were not always easy to understand, and I regret the times I let silence stand between us. But please, believe this, there was never a moment that I did not love you." Her father's words reached deep into her heart, breaking down the walls she had built around her own memories of him. She felt a flood of emotions, grief, regret, and an overwhelming sense of love. The silence between them, the misunderstandings, the resentment, all of it began to fade, replaced by a profound understanding of the man her father had been. The letter continued, shifting in tone as he began recounting his past, explaining the choices he had made. He shared stories of his own childhood, a time marked by hardship and loss. His own father had been distant and demanding, rarely offering praise or affection. It was this cold upbringing that had shaped William, forcing him into the mold of a man who believed strength meant silence and love meant protection, not vulnerability. "After your mother passed, I found myself lost, unsure of how to fill the void she left behind. You were there, my beautiful daughter, but I didn't know how to be a father to you on my own. I tried to stay strong, thinking that was what you needed. But in doing so, I fear I only distanced myself further." The memories of those quiet years washed over Emily. She remembered the nights she would sit at the dinner table, hoping he might ask her about her day, the long car rides where silence filled the space between them, and the holidays where laughter seemed to fade into the background. All those moments felt different now, as if the truth of his struggles added depth and color to the muted memories of her childhood. Her eyes continued to scan the letter, her breath hitching as she reached the paragraph that would alter her world forever. "Emily, there is something you need to know. I should have told you this years ago, but I worried it might change how you saw me or make you feel less than what you are. But you deserve to know the truth, even if it's coming too late." Emily's heart pounded in her chest, each word filling her with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. She held her breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "You were not born into this family. Your mother and I adopted you when you were a baby. We chose you, Emily, and from the moment we held you, you were ours. My love for you has always been that of a father for his daughter, unconditional and unwavering." The words seemed to echo in her mind, each syllable hammering into her with a force that left her stunned. She wasn't his biological daughter. She was adopted. The revelation settled over her like a shroud, an unimaginable truth that felt both surreal and deeply personal. She stared at the letter, her vision blurring as tears spilled down her cheeks. For a moment, the room around her faded, her mind spinning as she tried to make sense of this new reality. All her life, she had believed herself to be his daughter by blood, tied to him by more than just the bonds of family. Now she realized that the connection between them was something chosen, not given. A bond her father had embraced, even if he had never found the words to tell her. Her fingers trembled as she continued reading, her father's words revealing the depth of his love in ways she had never expected. Emily, you may not share my blood, but you are, and always have been, my daughter. I know I wasn't the father you needed in many ways. I hid behind my own insecurities, afraid that if you knew the truth, you would feel less loved, less worthy. But I need you to know that loving you was one of the greatest blessings of my life. Her father's confession broke through the wall she had built over the years, the hurt and resentment she had carried slowly dissolving in the warmth of his words. She realized that he had loved her deeply, though perhaps imperfectly, and that every choice he made had been driven by a desire to protect her. Every day, I watched you grow into the remarkable woman you are, filled with kindness, resilience, and grace. Your mother and I were so proud of you, and I wanted nothing more than to give you a good life, even if I struggled to show it. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for the things I couldn't say, the walls I put up, and the ways I fell short. Emily's hand flew to her mouth as she stifled a sob. The words on the page blurred as tears filled her eyes. The image of her father, a man who had loved her silently, began to take on a new meaning. He hadn't been distant out of apathy. He had been struggling with his own fears, afraid that he wasn't enough for her. And now, with this letter, he had given her the gift of understanding. A chance to see beyond his silence, to the love that had always been there. The letter concluded with a simple yet profound statement. You were the greatest gift of my life, Emily. I only wish I had told you that while I was still here. As she read the last words, Emily felt a wave of grief wash over her, mingling with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She clutched the letter to her chest, feeling the weight of her father's love, a love that had transcended blood and family, choosing her in a way she had never fully understood. In that moment, all the hurt and resentment she had carried melted away, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of peace. She had been loved, unconditionally and without reservation, by a man who had chosen her as his own. The revelation brought her a sense of closure, a chance to reconcile the past with the present, and a newfound understanding of the man her father had been. The pocket watch in the box beside her caught her eye, and she picked it up, feeling its cool weight in her hand. This was his legacy to her, a tangible symbol of the time they had shared and the love he had silently given her. She held it close, feeling a connection to him that she knew would never fade. As she sat in the quiet room, the letter in one hand and the watch in the other, Emily realized that her father's love had always been there, even in his silence. And though he was gone, his love remained, a quiet, unwavering presence that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Emily sat motionless in the quiet room, the letter still clutched tightly in her hand. Her mind raced, emotions swirling in a way she hadn't felt in years. The revelation from the letter that she was adopted had shaken her to her core, but it was her father's words about his love and regret that resonated the most. Her chest felt heavy, a painful ache forming as she realized just how deeply he had cared for her, despite the silence and distance she had interpreted as indifference. The letter had unlocked memories she had buried for years, flooding her mind with moments she had long forgotten. As a child, she had always sensed her father's quiet presence in the background of her life. She recalled the nights when he would sit beside her bed during thunderstorms, his hand resting gently on her back as she drifted off to sleep. He'd never said much, only offering a soft, "I'm here." But his presence had always been steady and comforting. Now she saw those memories in a new light, understanding that his quiet, stoic love had been his way of offering her security. A wave of regret washed over her, and she could feel the tears prickling her eyes. She had spent so many years assuming the worst, building walls around herself to shield from the perceived indifference of her father. But in doing so, she had closed herself off from the love he had offered her in his own way. She realized now that his distance wasn't coldness, but perhaps a sense of inadequacy, a silent struggle to show affection in a way he didn't know how. The memories kept flooding back. She remembered the time she had fallen off her bike when she was 10, scraping her knees and hands. Her father had been there in an instant, carefully cleaning her wounds and wrapping her arms in bandages. He hadn't scolded her or offered words of comfort, but his touch had been gentle, and he had stayed with her, his quiet presence reassuring her more than words ever could. She realized now that he had always been there, even when she hadn't seen it. Except she couldn't see what had been hanging just above her mother's head. With each memory, the weight of her regret grew heavier. She remembered her high school graduation, a momentous day that should have been filled with joy. Her father had sat quietly in the back row, clapping softly, his face showing a pride he hadn't expressed in words. She had barely acknowledged him, too busy celebrating with her friends, resentful that he hadn't been more demonstrative, more outwardly proud. In her mind, his reserved applause had been a sign of disinterest, but now she saw the truth. He had been proud. He had simply shown it in a way that she hadn't understood. She thought of her college years, the calls home that had grown fewer and farther between as she carved out her own life away from him. Her father had never complained, never pressured her to visit more often, even when she moved to a different state. She had interpreted his silence as indifference, believing he was content without her. But now she wondered if he had simply respected her independence, giving her the space he thought she needed. He had allowed her to live freely, silently supporting her without demanding anything in return. With a painful clarity, she realized that she had spent years misunderstanding him, seeing only his surface without ever looking deeper. Her father had loved her fiercely, perhaps more so than if she had been his biological daughter. He had chosen her, raised her, and given her the only love he knew how to give. And she, blinded by her own expectations, had spent her life searching for signs of affection that had always been there, hidden in the quiet gestures and unwavering presence that had defined him. The weight of her regret was almost unbearable. She had missed so many opportunities to tell him how much he meant to her, to show him that his love had been enough. She had let misunderstandings and assumptions rob her of precious moments, moments she could never get back. The last time she had seen him, she had barely spoken to him, too wrapped up in her own life to notice the quiet sadness in his eyes. The way he lingered a little longer at the door as she said goodbye. That had been her last chance, and she hadn't realized it. Tears streamed down her face as she sat in the quiet room, clutching the letter to her chest. She felt a mix of sorrow and gratitude, the love her father had left her, filling her heart, even as the regret threatened to consume her. She had spent so long resenting him, thinking he hadn't cared, only to find out that his love had been deeper than she could have imagined. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully feel the loss. She cried not only for the father she had lost, but for the years she had wasted misunderstanding him, for the love she hadn't allowed herself to see. She cried for the young girl she had been, longing for affection, and for the woman she had become. hardened by her own misinterpretations. She cried because she would never be able to tell him how much his love meant to her, how grateful she was for the sacrifices he had made. In her heart, she knew she had to forgive herself, to let go of the regret that weighed her down. Her father's letter had been his final gift, a way for him to show her the love he hadn't known how to express in life. She could almost feel his presence with her, as if he were offering her one last piece of comfort, urging her to find peace. As the tears subsided, a sense of calm washed over her. She realized that her father's love had shaped her in ways she hadn't understood, that his quiet presence had been a constant source of strength. He had taught her resilience, independence, and compassion, and those qualities were his legacy to her. The man she had resented was the same man who had loved her with every fiber of his being, and she vowed to carry that love forward, to honor his memory by living a life filled with gratitude and kindness. In the silence of the room, Emily made a promise to herself and to her father. She would not let the regret define her, nor would she allow the misunderstandings of the past to overshadow the love that had always been there. She would remember him not as the distant, stoic man she had once thought him to be, but as a father who had loved her unconditionally, who had given her a home and a family when he could have chosen otherwise. She took a deep breath, her heart feeling lighter as the weight of her regrets began to lift. The letter, the pocket watch, and the memories they held would be her reminders of the love that had been there all along. Her father had left her more than just a legacy. He had given her a second chance to understand the depth of his love, to see the beauty in his quiet strength. As she sat there, the silence around her no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt like a quiet reassurance, a reminder that love didn't always need to be spoken, to be felt. She knew that her father's love would remain with her, a silent, unbreakable bond that would carry her through the rest of her life. After finding her father's letter and the treasured heirloom, Emily felt a profound shift within herself. The sadness and regret that had initially consumed her began to give way to a sense of peace, like a calm after a long, turbulent storm. Holding the pocket watch in her hand, she realized that it wasn't just an object from her father's past. It was a symbol of his love, a reminder of the silent devotion he had shown her throughout her life. She gently placed the pocket watch into her coat pocket, feeling its reassuring weight close to her heart. It was as if a piece of her father would remain with her wherever she went. As she walked through the now familiar rooms of his home, she could feel his presence all around her, filling each corner with a warmth that made the house feel more like home than it ever had before. Every book, photo, and trinket seemed to tell a story of his love, waiting for her to recognize it. Days turned into weeks, and Emily found herself thinking about her father's words often. His letter had been more than a farewell. It was a lesson, a reminder of the importance of love that transcended blood, of family created not by biology, but by choice and commitment. She realized that her father had taught her a love that was unconditional, steady, and resilient. It was a love that asked for nothing in return, a love that had simply given all it had without expectation. She vowed to honor that love in her own life, to become someone her father would be proud of. The decision brought Emily a new sense of purpose. She began reaching out to people around her with a newfound compassion and openness, inspired by the quiet strength her father had shown. She volunteered at a nearby community center, finding joy in helping others, and discovering that her father's love had gifted her with a generosity she hadn't known she possessed. She built new friendships and strengthened old connections, creating bonds that she knew her father would have valued. The pocket watch became a treasured companion, a source of comfort that she kept close. Every time she felt doubt or sadness, she would hold it in her hand, feeling its steady weight and remembering her father's unspoken encouragement. It reminded her to keep moving forward, to find the courage to show her love openly and to forgive herself for the misunderstandings of the past. In many ways, she felt as though her father's presence was still guiding her, shaping the woman she was becoming. One quiet afternoon, Emily returned to her father's home, now a sanctuary filled with memories and lessons. She sat in the same room where she had found the letter, looking out the window at the late afternoon sun, casting gentle light across the familiar landscape. The room was silent, but it was a silence filled with peace rather than regret. She felt her father's love surrounding her, a quiet reassurance that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. With the pocket watch in her hand, she closed her eyes, feeling its cold metal warm in her palm. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the life her father had given her, for the love he had shown her, and for the forgiveness he had offered without ever needing to hear the words. She knew now that she didn't need to be perfect, that love wasn't something that demanded perfection, but acceptance and understanding. The sun dipped lower, casting a soft glow across the room, and Emily felt a sense of connection to her father that transcended the boundaries of life and death. It was as though he were right there beside her, a presence felt in every quiet breath. She understood that his love would remain with her, a quiet strength that would guide her forward, reminding her to live with kindness, compassion, and an open heart. Emily opened her eyes, a gentle smile spreading across her face as she looked out the window. She knew her father's love had changed her, and she felt a renewed determination to honor his memory by living fully, with gratitude and purpose. Holding the pocket watch close, she whispered a quiet thank you, a final word of gratitude to the man who had given her everything he had, even in silence. As she rose to leave the room, the house seemed to exhale with her, the weight of years and secrets lifting into a lightness that filled the air. She walked through the halls one last time, each step a farewell to the home and the father who had shaped her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Emily left her father's house that day, not in sorrow, but with a profound sense of peace. She had found closure, a connection to her father that went beyond words. The love he had shown her, a love as quiet and enduring as the ticking of his pocket watch, was now a part of her forever. She was gone by the time she reached her boss's office. Light was pale in the sky, and the sound of the ticking of her wisdom watch was now a part of the street sound. She picked up her pace and began to walk to her office building with a pace, steadied by the relief it had letting go, and the love he had shown her forever. And as she moved forward, carrying his memory in her heart, she knew she would continue to live by the lessons he had taught her, lessons of resilience, of kindness, and of the quiet, unbreakable strength of a father's love. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey through Emily's story. Sometimes love is expressed in ways that aren't always easy to see, and the greatest gifts we receive may come without words. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the silent gestures of love that surround you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of hidden kindness, deep family bonds, and life-changing realizations. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Has there been a moment when you discovered a hidden act of love in your own life? Until next time, remember to cherish those you hold dear, and let your love speak loudly, even in silence.